Hey, we back. I'm here on Karuta, and today we're talking about techniques. I just thought I'd go over all of the techniques that exist to give my opinion on them, as it were, because there are quite a few techniques, funnily enough, and they do have their different effects. Now, what all the techniques do is just change the way that the energy system works. So you can see here with spirit, the energy is called spirit. It's kind of debatable what to call it. I'm going to call it energy, all right? And this is the energy that you need in order to play your cards, or perks, or skills, or again, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it cards. It just makes sense to me. So this is the energy that you're required to play your cards. There are some free cards, like the default ones you get, like punch and block. They don't cost any energy. And then there's also cards that do cost energy. Most expensive one that I've seen, if I recall correctly, is Demigod Stance, which costs, I think, 6 energy, that's a lot of energy. In fact, there are a couple of techniques that can't even get up to 6, so that's fun. But anyway, yeah, they all just change the way that the energy system works, how you gain energy, what your maximum energy is. And then we also have vigor and exhaust here, which also affect the energy that you gain, and therefore are different depending on what your technique is. Now, the first technique is the spirit technique, which is the default technique for all fighters. All the other techniques cost a scroll, which you have to buy at the moment. There's probably going to be other ways to get scrolls added later, but currently the only way to get scrolls is to buy them from people that already have scrolls. And the way that you got a scroll was through the October voting rewards. If you got the gold tier, you got a scroll. And so there are people out there with scrolls. I believe the current going rate for a scroll is around 25 or 30 tickets, but until a method for gaining scrolls other than that is added, that price is going to keep going up, because there's no way to get scrolls and people are using them. The supply goes down, But anyway, spirit is the default one, and according to Craig is one of the best techniques because it is the default, which makes sense to me. It does seem pretty good, so let's go over how it works. Basically, your energy goes up as time goes on, without you having to do anything. You don't really have to think about it. This is how the gains of spirit play out up to turn 8. So on the first turn you gain 1 spirit, on the second turn you gain 2 spirit, the third turn you also gain 2, and that's because you gain the turn number plus 2 divided by 2. So you can see 1 plus 2 is 3, divided by 2 is 1.5, but it's rounded down. So then 2 plus 2 is 4, divided by 2 is 2, so we get 2. 3 plus 2 is 5, divided by 2 is 2.5, and it's rounded down. You see, maths, right? So in theory, on turn number 36, you would add 2 to 38, divide by 2, and get 19 spirit. But you have a maximum of 8 spirit, so eventually you just get your maximum every turn. It takes a good while, but eventually you do. What this means is that the spirit user gets better as time goes on. And in fact, once you're getting like 4 spirit per turn, you really don't need any more. Unless you're playing some insanely expensive cost cards, I don't think you're ever going to have a problem getting something like 4 spirit per turn. You're going to be pretty fine. And what that means is that if you can successfully stall out to turn 6 or 7, while not having the enemy get a huge number of buffs or something, you're pretty good as spirit. You're doing pretty well. And from that point onwards, you can definitely start winning. The issue is that the enemies that will kill you are the ones that get a lot of buffs, and they're going to do that quickly. And so stalling out to turn 6 or 7 might end up making you almost dead in the process. So that is worth noting. Getting some early game benefits as spirit is super useful, which is why on my Eris, who's my main fighter, I use the card Crowd Favorite, which is an opener and gives me 2 turns of vigor. Vigor causes the gain of spirit to increase by 50%. So there's some maths on how that works, but basically you get 50%. So if I use that on the first turn, of course, I still get my 1 spirit, but then on the second and the third turn, I get 3 spirit, and then my vigors run out, so I then get 3 spirit on the 4th and the 5th as well. This is pretty good, because getting 3 spirit is pretty reasonable. Like I said, you kind of want to be getting 4, but 3 is fine. You can do some stuff with 3 spirit, and that means it's only the first turn that I have to skip, really. I skip the first turn to use my crowd favorite, and then we start doing things immediately, which is great. Getting 3 spirit at the start of a spirit game is good. So spirit overall I would recommend using. As long as you can stall out a little bit, you're looking in good shape. And the other thing is you just generally don't have to think about it that much. This number goes up by itself, which is very nice. Spirit is the easy technique, and that is why it's the default one. So there you go, spirit. The next one is balance. Balance is also pretty good. Let's look at how it works. Fighters start each round with 1 balance and a maximum of 1 balance. Fighters gain 1 balance each time a 0-cost skill is used, so for example punch or block, which costs 0, by themselves or the opponent. Fighters also gain 1 maximum balance at the end of their turn, out to a maximum of 12 balance. First thing to note, maximum of 12 balance is more than Spirit's maximum of 8. So in theory, you actually get more balance, or more energy, using balance technique than you do getting spirit in the late game. Of course, at the start, you have a maximum of 1 balance and you have to wait for that to go up. So once again, your general energy generation goes up over time. However, you also have to consider that in order to actually get energy in the first place, you have to be playing 0-cost cards, or your opponent does. Now this is going to happen sometimes. In fact, it's going to happen quite a lot. You always get some blocks and some punches, and I can vouch for the fact that even if you're at level 100, you still draw them reasonably often. You're going to be playing punches and blocks sometimes, and you're going to be getting that free energy. Also, there are some free cost cards that you can take in the perk tree. Strike, for example, I think is just a bit of an upgraded punch, and as balance, it's really good to take stuff like that because it's a free energy for you. Worth noting, though, that you only get 3 actions per turn, and so does your opponent. So while I say your maximum energy is going to be higher than the maximum energy of the spirit user in the late game, actually spirit user in the late game is getting like 8 spirit per turn, whereas balance can only possibly get 6 energy per turn if both you and your opponent use all 3 of your actions on 0-cost actions, aside from stuff that gives free actions, but we'll get to that in a minute. So this means that balance late game isn't actually as good as spirit for the most part. It also means that you have to spend a lot of your actions using those 3 things in order to use anything that costs anything. Now, one of the cards that I think is the best in the game is the Kunai, which is a free action and a 0 cost, and it just does a couple of damage. This is really good because if you have strength buffs, it does a lot of damage. You can get a lot of kunais. Things like Ninja Stance gives you a kunai every turn, and you've also got Hidden Blades, which gives you 3 of them. And kunais are free actions. Therefore, they're 0-cost skills, and therefore they give you energy when you're balanced. They're also free actions, so then you can gain more than 3 balance per turn. So if you're using something like balance, you really want to go for things like kunais, which fits very well with what I would consider probably the best strategy in the game, which is the buffs. I would say, just based off its general description, balance probably isn't that good, but given the fact that the current winning strategy is something like buffs plus kunais, balance becomes probably one of the best techniques here, probably better than spirit. And I don't know if that's going to change. I kind of assume that Craig is going to update stuff when the meta shifts and all, and then balance might not be as good anymore, because I don't think it has in itself that much energy gain. But certainly at the moment it is doing pretty well. I would recommend giving balance a try. I'll just mention the vigor quickly. Once again, we get a 50% increase in the energy, this time through a 50% chance to gain an additional balance on a zero cost skill use. This is a bit RNG based here, but in theory you get 50% more balance. It's just you can't actually gain 50% more balance because each zero cost skill use gives you 1. It can't give you 1.5 energy, can it? So yeah, you get a 50% chance for more energy, which is fine. I noticed I didn't go over the exhaust of spirit, and I'm not really going to do it here either. Exhaust is always just the opposite of vigor, and for most of them underneath it'll just say the effects will cancel out, so I don't think it's super worth going over. But the exhaust in this case is kind of funky because they do not cancel each other out. It is possible to gain either 0 balance, 1 balance, or 2 balance on each zero cost skill use if you have both vigor and exhaust, which if you do the maths, that checks out. Then we have endurance. Endurance is kind of the rush strategy. It's probably my favorite as well, just because for most of the case, you aren't going to be hugely limited by its small maximum energy. But let's talk about how it works. Fighters start each round with a maximum of 3 endurance, and at the start of your turn, you have your endurance set to the maximum amount. Simple as it says, it provides fighters with significant early advantage. You will notice that this means that it has 3 energy on the first turn, which is pretty huge actually. 3 energy on the first turn, or in fact any turn, is really good. There aren't a lot of cards out there that cost more than 3 energy, and you can quite happily use like a 2 cost and a 1 cost, or maybe 3 1 costs, or hey, maybe just a 3 cost, whatever. And use up your turn like that. And because you get 3 energy on the first turn, you can do some really crazy stuff like first turn surges and stuff like that, which is pretty fantastic in my opinion. I certainly would love to get a first turn surge with my Yang, who is endurance. What this does mean though, in the late game you have a bit less of an advantage, because of course you've got people like Balance and Spirit who have maximum energy of 8 and 12 and are getting probably more than 3 energy per turn, whereas you're still stuck with 3, which isn't that great. But like I say, generally 3 is okay, and that early advantage that you can get is pretty good. If you do get a couple of early buffs, then you are going to be in a good winning position, and you're going to outgrow your opponent quite quickly. But yeah, you kind of do want to rush for it. I would say that endurance is probably better at a lower level, as in when you have a smaller deck size, because unless you manage to get like multiple surges or something like that, and you're drawing them super consistently, you're just going to be wanting to cycle your deck as fast as possible. Not that the deck quite works like that, but it's kind of finicky. Anyway, yeah, you're going to be wanting to draw your surge as fast as possible, and therefore having a smaller deck at the start when you're a lower level, you haven't got as many perks, seems pretty good to me. Alternatively, of course, just get multiple surges, lol. Yeah, that's kind of my aim at the moment with my endurance character, trying to ascend them a bunch so that I can get multiple surges at the start. But of course, ascending a character as bunch is easier said than done. Then we have the Vigor here, which increases the maximum endurance by 1, which is pretty fantastic. But of course, Vigor normally doesn't last long. There aren't many cards that give Vigor for more than 2 turns. In fact, I'm not sure there are any. And so presumably you spend an energy to get an energy most of the time with endurance, which is not that great. I don't know if I would actually highly recommend using Vigor as endurance, as much as that 1 energy is pretty nice. Like I say, I think for the most cases you're spending 1 to get it and you don't actually gain anything. But I don't know, maybe, and of course exhaust cancels it out. Moving on to Mimicry. Mimicry is kind of the opposite of endurance. Despite endurance being called endurance, it's the rush strat, and then Mimicry is the stall strat. Well, not necessarily. It's in the same sense of Spirit. You're going to get more and more energy as time goes on. I do think Spirit is probably just a better version of Mimicry, because with Spirit you're guaranteed to gain 1 energy per 2 turns, whereas Mimicry, in theory, you can get 1 energy per turn. But, well, let's have a look how it works and I'll explain. Fighters start each round with a maximum of 1 Mimicry, which is nothing, right? Fighters gain 1 maximum Mimicry after each turn in which they spend the same amount of Mimicry as they did the previous turn, up to a maximum of 8 Mimicry. Notice that this is the same as Spirit. So what this means, for example, spending 0 mimicry on turn 1 will trigger a gain of 1 maximum mimicry. Then if you spent 0 again on turn 2, you would gain again. If you spent 0 on turn 3, you'd gain again. But then if you went, oh, well, I've got like 4 mimicry now, I'll spend it, you no longer gain because you haven't spent the same amount as the previous turn. You did spend 0, now you've spent 4, so it's not the same amount, you don't gain. You see the issue here? What this means, in order to get the ball rolling, you kind of almost need to skip the first couple of turns, which goes against my entire principle of the rush strat and the crowd favorite on turn 1, so I get the 3 energy turn 2 and all the rest of it, you know? It doesn't seem that great to me. And as soon as you start going, oh, okay, well, now I can start spending my mimicry, then you're no longer gaining mimicry. Now, in theory, what you could do is say, okay, I've got 3 mimicry now, I'm going to spend it, and the next turn, I will also spend 3 mimicry, in which case, of course, you gain your maximum. Now you're spending 3 every turn, and your maximum is going up. This is much better. But in order to get into that situation, like I say, you kind of have to skip the first couple turns. Or what you could do, spend your 1 mimicry that you get on the first turn, and then on the second turn, spend 1 mimicry again. That also works, but now it's turn 3, and you're up to a maximum of 2 mimicry, which is not great. And then what do? Do you spend 1 regardless, so it keeps going up? Or do you spend 2 and use your mimicry and not have the maximum go up? I think you see what I'm getting at. I am not sure the mimicry is actually that great, because I think that you want some early game energy, and I think if you wanted to go for the big energy late game play, you should just use Spirit instead, because it has a more consistent gain that doesn't require you to just not spend your energy at all. So I don't know. I could see mimicry working out. Like I say, in theory, you do get faster late game, quote unquote, energy than you would with Spirit. So maybe mimicry is okay. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan. The Vigor here grants 50% chance again to gain 1 additional max mimicry after each turn when the fighters use the same amount, which also means that if you don't use the same amount as previously, Vigor does nothing, which is wonderful. We also have the same deal we did with Balance here, because it's a 50% chance. The Vigor and Exhaust don't exactly cancel each other out, and you can read here to see the details. I've explained it kind of already with Balance. And finally we have Rage. Rage gains more energy based off the amount of damage you take. So let's have a look. Fighters start each round with 1 Rage, and then gain 1 Rage for every 6% of maximum health damage they receive, or every 6% maximum health damage mitigated by block. Armor-based does not grant Rage, but this basically means that they take extra energy every time they get hit. So what you have to do in order to figure out how good Rage is work out how much percentage maximum health damage you are typically receiving, and therefore how much Rage you're going to get, and is it enough, basically. I imagine that in the early game you have a similar situation to Endurance, in that you will probably be getting 3 or 4 early on turn 1 or on turn 2 or turn 3, which is pretty good. But then late game, when you get to like turn 8 or something, you're still getting that, because the damage that the enemy does probably doesn't go up that significantly. And of course, if you're hoping the enemy is doing a lot of damage, you are going to need a lot of block in order to mitigate that, or you will just end up dying. You can't go for any armor strats or anything like that, because that will not grant you your Rage. You're just going to need a lot of block. So it does fit nicely with the buffs game. If you play the buffs game and your enemy plays the buffs game, then you'll be blocking a lot of damage each turn and getting a lot of energy, which is kind of cool. But that relies on the enemy's strat as well as your own, so I feel like it's a little bit sketchy. It's worth noting as well that, of course, on turn 1 you have taken no damage, so on turn 1 you get that 1 energy, which is exactly the same as Spirit. And Spirit's only downside, in my opinion, is the fact that it gets 1 energy on turn 1. So I don't think Rage is that good, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of Rage, but again, it could work out. I feel like the same as Mimicry. It is just worse than Spirit in every way. But yeah, I mean, Rage, huh? And then the Vigor here causes the gain of Rage to be increased by 50%. So you would get, 50% more energy, which is cool, I guess. But I don't think that's going to make that much difference. Also worth mentioning that your maximum on Rage is only 6, which is, again, just less than Spirit is. So your late game isn't going to be that good, even if you do get the big damage coming in. Overall, let's say I try and rank all of the techniques. What I would say is that, at least with regards to current meta, as far as I understand it, balance is probably the best, just because it works so well with the buff strategy and using the kunais and stuff. Then probably endurance, because it gets that very early game buffs, and you can use Surge turn 1 and stuff like that. Then it would be Spirit, and then probably Mimicry, and then Rage. That's what I would say. That's my opinion. Of course, you're welcome to disagree with me on that. And despite that, I'm out here using endurance instead of balance. So you don't have to follow my advice if you don't want. And of course, Spirit is still pretty good. So if you are not willing to spend a bunch of extra tickets on scrolls, would highly recommend just using Spirit. It's a good technique, funnily enough. And assuming that things change, I expect to see a Surge nerf at some point, because Surge is just way too good, really. And assuming that happens, I imagine probably it'll swap around a little bit. But anyway, I think that is everything that I was looking to say in this video, so I will end it here. Bye!